Hey guys, it's Miss Insko-Grady here, and this is our last 3 weeks of school together, so we are on our very last unit. Before we get started, I want to tell you to please finish strong. Your assignments have been pared way down. Make sure you get everything done. If you have missing work, get it done and then contact me so I know to go look for it. But let's finish strong, okay? There's still time. All right, our last unit is over the novel The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And we're going to start with the question, what is thug life? I know you're laughing because I'm saying thug life. So I'm going to let Tupac tell you.
Hugglife. The hate you gave little infant, ECK, everybody. Meaning, what you feed us as seeds grows and blows up in your face. That's thug life.
Okay, so our author, Angie Thomas, was inspired by Tupac when she was writing, and this particular video clip that she saw on YouTube. So, in an interview with Cosmo, she said that she was trying to figure out a title for the book, and she came across that YouTube clip that you just saw. And when she saw him explain what it meant, it hit her that not just in this book, but that this is what we see in society. When these unarmed Black people lose their lives, the hate they've been given screws us all. We see it in the form of anger. We see it in the form of riots. So when she saw that in the video, she said it was a sign for her novel. And there it is again, same thing that Tupac just told you. Okay, so The Hate You Give, there's some controversy over this novel, and I'm going to pose the question now that I want us to answer in our last week is it a new classic? So it was published in 2017, and it's already been banned in the Texas school district for vulgarity. Yeah, there's some bad language and some sensitive topics, but we'll see if you agree with that or not by the end. It did debut on the bestsellers list. It's won countless awards, too many for me to list right here. And the movie rights were very quickly sold, and the film was premiered in the fall of 2018, and I bet most of you have probably already seen it. Remember that just like any other novel and movie adaptation, they're going to be different. So don't rely solely on the movie. Remember, you can use the audiobook too that you'll have access to with our Scribd subscriptions. So I want to give you some background information because The Hate You Gives makes several references to some past and present activists and groups and social issues, and you need to know what they are in order to fully understand them. So the first is Malcolm X, and he was really born Malcolm Little in 1925. His father was killed by a white supremacist group, and the police ruled that it was an accident, which poured the gasoline on his feelings of racial division. He did spend some time in prison for burglary, and he used that time, however, to pursue education. And it was during this time of self education that his brother, who was a recent Muslim convert, came to visit him. And it led Malcolm to read about the Nation of Islam, whose leader really believed that whites actively tried to keep African Americans from achieving success. And this is what he'd experienced most of his life. He became Malcolm X when he left prison because he believed that his last name Little was a slave name and that the new X he used as his last name represented his lost African name and heritage. He became a leader of the Nation of Islam and a major civil rights leader. A lot of times when we talk about the civil rights, people think Martin Luther King Jr., but these men were in opposition of each other through most of their careers, but were both civil rights leaders in their own respects. So in contrast to the teaching of Martin Luther King, who believed in, passiveness, he promoted this idea for African Americans to defend themselves by any means necessary. And this is what makes him a controversial figure in American history. However, after some controversy within the Nation of Islam, he actually left it and founded his own group, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. So it was after a trip to Mecca in which Malcolm X interacted with people of other cultures, that he returned to America and began speaking not just to African Americans, but directed many of his speeches to whites as well, wanting to bridge the gap between the races. A lot of people don't realize that the pilgrimage to Mecca is a major rite of passage for a Muslim. And for him, it was enlightening. And he realized not all people of other races were out to get him, not all people of other races were evil, and thus changed his ways towards the end of his life. But after repeated attempts on his life, he was finally assassinated in 1965. Okay, let's talk about Dr. Percy Newton, Huey P. Newton. Many of you may have heard that name before, hopefully. He's an African American political activist born in 1942. He spent his teenage years in California. He was poor and was arrested several times for criminal offenses, including vandalism and gun possession. And growing up, Newton said he was made to feel ashamed of being black, and he graduated high school unable to read, although he did teach himself how to read later in his life, and having lost almost all of his drive to learn. In college, he became active in politics and played a role in getting the first African American history course adopted into the curriculum. And then with Bobby Seale, he created the Black Panther Party for Self Defense in 1966. Much of what you've probably heard of the Black Panther Party through, I don't know, limited interactions is negative, and I will tell you that it is not all negative. He was later murdered during a drug transaction. So, the goal of the Black Panther Party originally was to work for the right to self defense by African Americans, and it included goals like better housing, education, and jobs for African Americans. It was based on social justice, it was not based on violence. Their ideas were heavily influenced by Malcolm X's teachings. And the group believed that violence or the threat of it might be needed to bring about social change. And this is where all of the negativity that is held towards the Black Panther Party comes from. They did, however, institute many social programs. They had a free breakfast for children program. They had community health clinics. They were known for running grocery programs for the elderly. Just so many things. Again, fighting for fair and equal housing, education for the African American community. And the members, however, were involved in many shootouts with police, including Newton, and the group was considered a threat by the U.S. government because of this. Okay, another reference is going to be Emmett Till. And even though the exact events are disputed now, Emmett was said to have whistled at or flirted with a married white woman at her family's grocery store. So he went into the store, they say he whistled at her, flirted with her, made a pass at her. And then a few nights later, her husband and brother in law abducted him. And you see that correctly. He was a 14-year-old boy. He was beat and mutilated before they shot him and they sunk his body in the river. Emmett's mother insisted on having an open casket funeral, even though Till was beaten beyond recognition, because she wanted to focus attention on American racism. She wanted people to see what they were doing to our nation's young black men. Images of his body were published in black magazines and newspapers, and he became an icon of the civil rights movement in his death. His killers were acquitted by an all-white jury, and decades later, the woman he supposedly offended admitted that she fabricated her testimony, that it was not true. So, what about civil rights today? I'll ask you this question. Have things gotten any better? You answer that. And we'll look at that again in the last week. We do have the shooting of Trayvon Martin. Just to put this into perspective a little bit, it was a cold February night. Trayvon was a 17-year-old African-American high school student. He was shot by George Zimmerman. Zimmerman is a mixed-race Hispanic man. He was the neighborhood watch coordinator in his gated community. And in the year prior, there had been many attempted robberies in this neighborhood, making people fearful that anyone they didn't recognize was a threat. So between 2004 and 2012, Zimmerman made over 50 calls to the police about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. And the only description he ever offered the police was their race and they were all black males. The night of the shooting, Zimmerman saw Martin walking, called the police to report it. Zimmerman began following him, told the police he was following him, and the police told him there was no need for him to do that. But Zimmerman quickly hung up on him. After Zimmerman ended the call, that's when the altercation occurred between Zimmerman and Martin, resulting in the shooting. Trayvon had been unarmed. When police arrived, Zimmerman's nose was bleeding. He was taken for questioning for 5 hours and released. And following Martin's death, there was a public outcry for Zimmerman's arrest, including protests and petitions. Despite this, Zimmerman was found not guilty by a jury. The trial inspired a Facebook post saying Black Lives Matter, which we know to be the social justice movement today, but it began as a post. So the Black Lives Matter movement, again, originally an online movement using the hashtag in response to the Zimmerman trial. In 2014, however, the Black Lives Matter group demonstrated against the deaths of numerous other African Americans due to police brutality. Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, just to name a few. Since then, the Black Lives Matter movement organization has continued carrying out demonstrations against wrongful deaths of African Americans and other social injustices. The movement has grown to become an international one. However, there is some controversy that exists around the movement, and some accuse it of being racist itself, which has led to the creation of the All Lives Matter movement. Though Black Lives Matter proponents say that those who believe it's racist misunderstand its point. The idea is not that other people's lives don't matter, it's that Black lives matter too. Okay, so those of you may or may not know that Tupac attended Performing Arts High School and that he kept a journal of many poems. And he actually has a book of published poetry, and I have a copy of it on the bookshelf behind my desk if you ever want to take a look at it. So here's a poem called The Rose That Grew from Concrete. And again, you're going to see shades of this and these ideas in our novel. So the poem says, "Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong. It learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else ever cared." So on the surface, it's just this idea that no matter your circumstance, you can rise above and bloom and be successful. But Tupac obviously is talking specifically about African American experience in America, and that no matter how much you try to hold the African American community down, they will continue to rise and grow and be beautiful and successful. Okay, to end our notes, I want to talk about 3 additional social ideas, okay? One is this idea of double consciousness. This idea is also known as code switching. And the idea here is that in order to fit into mainstream society, people of color, and this is African American, Hispanic, um, must act white in order to obtain work or credit or advancement. And that, however, in their personal lives, they switch back and embrace their culture. So I must talk like a white person at work so that I'm not threatening. However, in my own life, I can use the vernacular of the place that I come from. Then there's also this idea of what we call respectability politics, and it's a set of beliefs that holds that conformity to socially acceptable or mainstream standards of appearance and behavior will protect a member of a marginalized or minority group from prejudices and systemic injustices. So again, it's kind of like double consciousness, but this idea that, well, if you straighten your hair and wear conservative clothing, that you are somehow going to be more accepted in the workforce or just in mainstream society in general. And the last one I want to talk about is known as the crooked room. And this is an idea that speaks specifically to African American women. And the idea that is because American society has such warped images of Black women that they are always entering a crooked room. And that instead of sitting straight in a crooked room and realizing it's crooked, that many Black women bend and tilt themselves to fit the distortion of whatever that archetype or stereotype is. So it could be the mammy, the Jezebel, the angry woman, um, that these are the images that are available to Black women in American society, and thus they must fit one of those holes. Um, and you're going to see some of that in our novel. The last thing I want to point out, and there's no slide for, is I want you to think about a couple of our literary criticisms that you're going to be asked to speak on later on. I want you to think about Marxism, and I want you to remember that Marxism is the idea of power and who has it. It's that the patriarchy runs things and that marginalized groups will rise up against those beliefs. I also want you to think about psychoanalysis and remember that's not just the division of the id, ego, and superego. The ego being the balance of morality, the id being like the devil on your shoulder who is motivated by pleasure, the superego being the sense of complete moral center. But it also has to do with conscious and unconscious motivations. Why do people do things? What's their motivation? And the last one I want you to think about is the deconstructionist lens. So, this lens has to do with role reversals. So the hero is really the villain is really the hero, but it's also about binary, complete and total opposites. So the presence of good versus evil, young versus old, rich versus poor, white versus black. That I want you to think about those as you read. Okay, guys, I hope that you enjoy this novel and that we end this trimester strong. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. There are some really, really heavy concepts in this novel. And if at any point you just want to talk or complain or be frustrated about the people um, that are present in the novel, please send me a message. Okay? I miss you guys so much, and I can't wait to talk to you about this novel. Bye, guys.